The military recruitment center buzzed with nervous energy as young men and women filled out their paperwork. Among them sat Elena Martinez, a 22-year-old woman with calloused hands and steady eyes that had seen more hardship than most people twice her age. She wore a simple cotton shirt and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything other than an ordinary girl from a small mountain town. The recruitment officer, Sergeant Davidson, called her name with the same bored tone he had used for the previous 30 applicants that morning. Elena stood and walked to his desk, her movements precise and controlled. Davidson barely looked up from his computer screen as he began his standard questions about education, work history, and physical fitness. When he asked about her preferred military specialty, Elena's answer made him pause mid-keystroke. She wanted to be a sniper. Davidson's eyebrows shot up and he finally looked at her properly. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not quite mocking but certainly amused. He had heard plenty of unrealistic requests before, but this was a new one. Other recruits waiting in line began to whisper and chuckle. A skinny girl wanting to join the most elite shooting unit in the military seemed like a joke. One muscular young man sitting nearby actually laughed out loud, earning him a sharp look from another officer. But the damage was done. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from professional to dismissive. Davidson leaned back in his chair, his amusement barely concealed. He explained with exaggerated patience that sniper positions were extremely competitive. They required exceptional physical conditioning, perfect eyesight, psychological stability under extreme pressure, and most importantly, shooting skills that placed candidates in the top 1% of marksmen. Did she have any shooting experience at all? Elena nodded quietly. She had grown up hunting in the Sierra Madre Mountains. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 7 years old, starting with tin cans and graduating to moving targets by the time she was 10. After her father died in a mining accident when she was 14, hunting had become more than a hobby. It had become survival. She and her mother had relied on the meat Elena brought home to get through the lean winters. The sergeant's expression suggested he had heard similar stories 100 times before. Mountain hunting was one thing. Military precision shooting was entirely different. He gave her a form to fill out anyway, more out of obligation than genuine interest. As Elena took the paper and returned to her seat, she could feel the amused stares burning into her back. What none of them knew was that Elena had spent the last 8 years doing more than hunting deer and rabbits. In her remote mountain village, she had earned a reputation that spread quietly through the surrounding communities. When farmers had problems with predators taking their livestock, they called Elena. When injured animals needed to be put down humanely from a distance, they called Elena. She never missed. By the time she was 16, Elena could hit a target the size of a coin from 300 meters away. By 18, she had taught herself to calculate wind speed by watching grass movements and to judge distance by the sound delay of her shots echoing off canyon walls. She kept a weathered notebook filled with detailed observations about how temperature, altitude, and humidity affected bullet trajectory. But Elena had learned long ago that talking about her skills only invited disbelief or unwanted attention. So she stayed quiet, filled out her paperwork with careful attention to detail, and waited for her chance to prove herself. The recruitment process would include a basic marksmanship test. That would have to be enough. 3 weeks later, Elena found herself at the military training facility along with 200 other new recruits. The place was massive, with obstacle courses, running tracks, and multiple shooting ranges spread across hundreds of acres. She was assigned to a barracks with 15 other women, most of whom seemed much more confident and outgoing than she was. During the first week, they endured physical fitness tests that left even the strongest recruits gasping for air. Elena surprised everyone, including herself, by finishing in the top 20%. Years of climbing mountain trails with heavy packs of hunting equipment had built endurance she had never thought to measure against others. Still, nobody paid her much attention. She was quiet, kept to herself, and didn't stand out in any obvious way. The marksmanship qualification came on the 8th day. Recruits were divided into groups of 20 and taken to the range in shifts. Elena's group arrived just after lunch. The range instructor, a weathered master sergeant named Kowalski, gave them a brief safety lecture and then demonstrated proper shooting stance with a standard military rifle. Each recruit would fire 30 rounds at targets placed at 100 meters. The minimum passing score required 20 hits within the target's center rings. Anything above 25 hits was considered excellent for a new recruit. Kowalski had seen maybe 10 recruits achieve perfect scores in his 15 years of teaching, and most of those had been competitive shooters before joining. The recruits took turns, 5 at a time, lying prone on the firing line. Some did well, some barely passed, and a few failed entirely. Elena waited patiently for her turn, watching the others and noting how the afternoon wind was picking up slightly from the east. She could see a flag at the far end of the range rippling steadily. When her name was called, she took her position on the firing line. The rifle felt different from her father's old hunting gun, but the principles were the same. She settled into a comfortable position, controlled her breathing, and began to fire. The first shot felt right. The second felt perfect. By the fifth shot, Elena had entered that focused state where everything else disappeared except the target, the crosshairs, and her breathing. She fired all 30 rounds in steady succession, never rushing, never hesitating. When the ceasefire was called and the targets were examined, Kowalski's expression changed from routine boredom to sharp interest. He looked at Elena's target, then at Elena, then back at the target. He picked up his radio and said something quietly that the recruits could not hear. Elena had not just hit the center rings 30 times. She had placed all 30 rounds in a grouping so tight that several bullet holes overlapped. At 100 meters with iron sights and a rifle she had never fired before, she had performed at a level that Kowalski had rarely seen even from experienced soldiers. This quiet girl had just announced herself as something extraordinary. General Martinez led Sergeant Voss to the shooting range, where 12 soldiers had already failed. The afternoon heat was still intense and the distant hillside shimmered in the haze. The metal target, barely visible even with binoculars, sat waiting at 2,670 meters. "That's the target," Martinez said, handing her the binoculars. "Every marksman I've brought here has missed. Some by centimeters, others by meters. The mission I'm planning requires absolute certainty that someone can make this shot under pressure." Voss studied the target through the binoculars for a long moment. She didn't speak, didn't make any comment about the difficulty or express doubt. She simply observed, taking in every detail of the terrain, the light conditions, and the way the heat created visible distortions in the air. "May I see the rifle and ammunition specifications?" she asked quietly. The general nodded and brought her to the equipment table where a precision rifle sat waiting. It was a state-of-the-art weapon, perfectly maintained and equipped with the best optics money could buy. Voss picked it up, checked its weight and balance, and examined the scope settings. "How much time do I have to prepare?" she asked. Martinez was surprised by the question. Most shooters wanted to prove themselves immediately. "You can have whatever time you need within reason." "Do you want to attempt the shot today?" Voss shook her head. "No, sir. I need to come here at different times over the next few days. I want to observe the wind patterns, the light changes, and how conditions vary throughout the day. A shot like this isn't about pulling a trigger. It's about understanding the environment completely." The general found himself impressed by her methodical approach. This was exactly the kind of thinking he needed. "Take 3 days. Learn everything you can. Then we'll see what you're capable of." Over the next 3 days, Voss did something none of the other marksmen had thought to do. She didn't practice shooting. Instead, she sat at the range for hours watching. She arrived before dawn to observe how morning conditions affected visibility. She stayed through midday to track the heat patterns. She returned at sunset to see how fading light changed the landscape. She brought notebooks and filled them with observations. Wind speeds and directions at different times. Temperature variations. The way moisture in the air affected clarity. She talked to weather forecasters about regional patterns. She studied topographical maps of the area between the shooting position and the target. Other soldiers noticed her presence and whispered among themselves. Who was this logistics officer spending all day at the sniper range? Why wasn't she actually shooting? Some thought she was wasting time. Others assumed she'd already given up and was just going through motions to avoid embarrassing herself. Lieutenant Reeves visited her on the second day. "Sergeant, shouldn't you be practicing the actual shot? You've been here 12 hours and haven't fired once." Voss looked up from her notes. "Sir, the 12 marksmen who came before me were all excellent shooters. Their technical skills weren't the problem. They failed because they didn't fully understand the environment they were shooting through. I'd rather spend 3 days learning and make one good shot than spend 3 days shooting and learn nothing." Her logic was sound, and Reeves left her to continue her work. By the third day, Voss had compiled detailed information about every factor that could affect a bullet traveling 2,670 meters. She knew that winds were calmest between 6 and 7 in the morning. She understood that temperature affected powder burn and bullet velocity. She'd calculated exactly how much the bullet would drop over that distance and how to compensate. On the morning of the fourth day, Voss reported to General Martinez. "I'm ready to attempt the shot, sir." Martinez had been hoping to hear those words but felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. If Voss failed like the others, he'd run out of options. The mission would have to be redesigned, possibly putting more lives at risk. Everything depended on what happened in the next hour. They arrived at the range at dawn. The air was cool and relatively still. Exactly as Voss had predicted would be the optimal time. She set up her shooting position with careful precision, adjusting the rifle rest and arranging herself behind the weapon. Several officers had gathered to watch, word having spread that the logistics sergeant was attempting the impossible shot. Some were skeptical, others curious. Corporal Henderson, who'd been the last to try and fail, stood with his arms crossed, watching with a mixture of hope and doubt. Voss loaded a single round into the chamber. She didn't hurry. Every movement was deliberate and calm. She settled into position, her body relaxed but controlled, and looked through the scope at the distant target. Minutes passed. Voss didn't move. She was so still that some observers wondered if she'd frozen or changed her mind. But she was doing what great shooters do, reading the environment with senses beyond sight. Feeling the tiniest shifts in air pressure, listening to how wind moved through the valley, becoming part of the moment rather than fighting against it. General Martinez watched through his binoculars, his jaw tight with tension. The officers around him barely breathed. Henderson found himself silently rooting for her, wanting to see someone succeed where he'd failed. Then, without any warning or countdown, Voss exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. The bullet left the barrel at over 800 meters per second, beginning its long journey through the air. For nearly 4 seconds, everyone waited. At that distance, there's a strange disconnect between cause and effect. You shoot and then you wait to see what the universe decides. The bullet traveled through changing air currents, dropped under gravity's pull, and fought against atmospheric resistance. Then came the unmistakable sound of metal striking metal. Even at 2,670 meters, the impact was audible. Through his binoculars, Martinez saw the target plate swing backward from the hit. For a moment, he couldn't believe it. He looked again to be sure. "Hit," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then louder, "Direct hit." The officers around him erupted in surprised congratulations. Henderson let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and shook his head in amazement. Voss simply set the rifle down carefully and stood up, showing no particular emotion. Martinez walked over to her quickly. "Sergeant, that was extraordinary. Do you think you could do it again?" Voss considered the question seriously. "Yes, sir. The conditions are still optimal. If you want confirmation, I can attempt a second shot." "I do," Martinez said immediately. He needed to know it wasn't luck. Voss returned to her position, loaded another round, and settled back into her shooting stance. This time she took even less time to prepare, having already read the conditions thoroughly. Within 2 minutes, she fired again. Another 4-second wait, another metallic ping echoing across the distance, another direct hit. The observers were no longer just impressed. They were stunned. 2 consecutive hits at 2,670 meters was something most of them had never witnessed. This quiet logistics officer had just demonstrated shooting ability that exceeded everyone in the battalion. Martinez felt relief flood through him. He'd found his shooter, but as he looked at Voss's calm expression, he also felt curiosity. Where had this ability come from? Why had she never pursued it? And most importantly, would she be willing to use it for the mission he had in mind? "Sergeant Voss, I need to brief you on something classified," Martinez said. "What I'm about to tell you goes beyond today's demonstration. It's about the real reason I needed to find someone with your skills." Voss nodded and followed him toward the command building. Behind her, the officers continued discussing what they'd just witnessed. Word would spread quickly through the base. The quiet woman from logistics had done what 12 trained marksmen couldn't, but the real test was still to come. Word spread quickly through the training facility about the girl who shot like a machine, By dinner that evening, recruits from other companies had heard exaggerated versions of the story. Some said she had put all 30 shots through the same hole. Others claimed she had done it blindfolded. The truth was impressive enough without embellishment, but military gossip never stayed accurate for long. Elena tried to ignore the attention, but it was impossible. Other recruits who had barely noticed her before suddenly wanted to sit with her at meals and ask questions. Where had she learned to shoot? Had she competed professionally? Was she planning to try out for special forces? She answered politely but briefly, uncomfortable with the spotlight. Not everyone was impressed. A recruit named Marcus Webb, who had scored 27 hits and considered himself the best shooter in their company, made several loud comments about luck and beginner's fortune. He suggested that Elena's performance was a fluke that she would never be able to repeat. His friends nodded in agreement, though their support seemed half-hearted. The training continued with increasing intensity. Recruits learned hand-to-hand combat, tactical movement, equipment maintenance, and military protocols. Elena absorbed everything with the same quiet focus she brought to shooting. She was not the fastest runner or the strongest fighter, but she never quit and never complained. Her instructors noted this in their reports. 3 weeks into basic training, Sergeant Kowalski approached Elena after a particularly grueling obstacle course session. He told her that there would be an advanced marksmanship evaluation in 2 days. It was optional and designed for recruits who showed exceptional potential. The test would be considerably harder than the basic qualification. Targets would be placed at varying distances up to 500 meters. Recruits would shoot from different positions and under time pressure. Most importantly, representatives from the sniper training program would be observing. Elena felt her heart rate increase despite her exhaustion. This was exactly the opportunity she had hoped for. She thanked Kowalski and spent the next 2 evenings maintaining her rifle with meticulous care. She also spent time at the range during free periods, though she was only allowed to dry fire without ammunition. Real bullets were too expensive to waste on practice. The morning of the advanced evaluation arrived cold and windy. 12 recruits had volunteered for the test, including Marcus Webb. They assembled at the long-range facility, a more sophisticated setup than the basic qualification range. Electronic targets dotted the landscape at various distances, and observation towers allowed the evaluators to watch from elevated positions. A captain named Reeves explained the test format. Each recruit would engage 20 targets in sequence. The targets would appear at random distances and remain visible for only 15 seconds each. Recruits would shoot from prone, kneeling, standing, and supported positions depending on which target appeared. The scoring would account for both accuracy and speed. Marcus went first, perhaps wanting to set a high bar for the others. He performed well, hitting 16 out of 20 targets and earning nods of approval from Captain Reeves. Several other recruits followed with similar results. One managed 17 hits. The bar was set high. When Elena's turn came, she stepped up to the firing line with the same calm demeanor she always displayed. The first target appeared at 200 meters. She dropped to prone position and fired within 5 seconds. Hit. The second target popped up at 350 meters, requiring a kneeling stance. She adjusted her position smoothly and fired. Hit. Target after target appeared, each one presenting a different challenge. Elena moved through positions fluidly, her movements economical and precise. Her breathing remained steady. Her hands never trembled. At one point, a target appeared at 470 meters in a tricky crosswind that had caused several previous recruits to miss. Elena paused for 3 seconds, reading the wind by watching dust swirl near the target, then fired. Hit. When the sequence ended, Elena had hit 19 out of 20 targets. She had missed only the final target, a partially concealed silhouette at maximum range that had fooled most other shooters as well. Captain Reeves studied his scoring tablet with an expression that revealed nothing. He thanked Elena and called the next recruit. After all 12 shooters had finished, Captain Reeves announced the top 3 performers. Marcus placed third. Another recruit placed second. Elena placed first. Marcus's face flushed red, though he managed a stiff nod of acknowledgement. Some of the other recruits whispered among themselves, clearly surprised that the quiet girl had beaten everyone. What Elena did not know was that the observers in the tower had seen something beyond just accurate shooting. They had watched her analyze each target, adjust for conditions, and execute her shots with a level of tactical thinking that usually took years to develop. One of the observers, a lieutenant colonel named Sarah Chen, made several notes on her tablet and highlighted Elena's name. That evening, Elena was called to the company commander's office. She walked across the base wondering if she had done something wrong. Protocol violations during training could result in extra duty or even dismissal. She reviewed the past few days in her mind, but could not think of any mistakes she had made. The company commander, Major Harrison, sat behind his desk with a folder open in front of him. He gestured for Elena to sit and studied her for a long moment before speaking. He explained that her marksmanship scores had attracted attention from several branches of the military. The sniper training program wanted to fast-track her evaluation. The special reconnaissance units were also interested. Even military intelligence had submitted an inquiry. Elena sat very still, processing this information. Major Harrison continued. He said that opportunities like this did not come along often, especially not for recruits barely a month into basic training. However, he wanted to make sure Elena understood what she was getting into. Sniper training was brutal. The washout rate exceeded 70%. Even talented shooters failed because they could not handle the psychological pressure or the extreme physical demands. Elena met his eyes directly and said she understood. She had not come to the military for an easy path. She had come because she wanted to use her skills to serve something larger than herself. After her father died, she had spent years feeling like her abilities were wasted on shooting rabbits for dinner. She wanted to prove that she could be more than a poor girl from a forgotten mountain village. Major Harrison nodded slowly. He told Elena that he would approve her transfer to advanced evaluation status, but she would need to complete basic training first. That meant 6 more weeks of running, drilling, and learning skills that had nothing to do with shooting. She could not let her other training suffer just because she was good with a rifle. The military needed well-rounded soldiers, not one-dimensional specialists. Elena promised to maintain her performance in all areas. As she left the office, she felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was what she had wanted, but now that it was becoming real, the weight of expectation settled heavily on her shoulders. Back in the barracks, her bunkmate congratulated her on the evaluation results. Word had already spread, as it always did in the military. The next 6 weeks tested Elena in ways she had not anticipated. The physical training intensified, with longer runs, heavier packs, and more complex obstacle courses. The academic work increased too, with classes on military history, tactics, and leadership. Elena studied late into the night, determined not to let anything slip. She also had to navigate the complicated social dynamics of military life. Some recruits respected her abilities and treated her as an equal. Others resented her rapid rise and made snide comments about favoritism or special treatment. Marcus Webb remained coldly polite but clearly bitter about being outshot by someone he had dismissed as a joke weeks earlier. Graduation from sniper training came on a cold morning in late autumn. Of the 26 candidates who had started, only 9 completed the program. Elena stood in formation wearing her new uniform insignia, a small badge that identified her as a qualified military sniper. Her mother had traveled from their mountain village to attend the ceremony, her first time leaving home in over a decade. Seeing pride in her mother's eyes made all the hardship worthwhile. After graduation, Elena expected assignment to a regular unit, where she would continue training and wait for deployment. Instead, she received orders to report to a classified facility in Virginia. No explanation was provided, just a date, time, and security clearance level she did not even know she possessed. Jennifer received similar orders, as did 2 other graduates from their class. The Virginia facility looked like an ordinary military base from the outside, but once through the security checkpoints, its true nature became apparent. This was a training ground for special operations units that most people did not know existed. Elite soldiers from various branches conducted advanced training here, preparing for missions that would never appear in news reports. Elena and the 3 other snipers were met by Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, the same officer who had observed Elena's performance during the advanced marksmanship evaluation months earlier. Chen was in her mid-30s with sharp features and an intensity that suggested she had seen serious combat. She explained that they had been selected for evaluation by a specialized unit that recruited only the most exceptional soldiers. The unit had no official name, though members referred to themselves by call signs based on predatory birds: Black Hawk, Red Kite, Peregrine. The candidates would spend the next 6 months in intensive training, and if they passed, they would receive their own call signs and join the operational roster. Chen emphasized that this was not guaranteed. The washout rate for this program exceeded 90%. Most candidates failed not because of physical or technical limitations, but because they could not adapt to the unique psychological demands of the work. The training began immediately. Unlike conventional military instruction, this program focused on individual problem-solving and decision-making. Candidates were given complex scenarios with incomplete information and conflicting priorities. There were no instructors telling them what to do, only mission objectives and consequences for failure. They had to figure out solutions using whatever resources and skills they possessed. One early exercise placed Elena alone in a mock urban environment filled with hidden role players representing both enemies and civilians. Her mission was to locate and eliminate a specific target without causing collateral damage or being detected. She had 4 hours to complete the task. No instructions were provided on how to proceed. Elena spent the first hour simply observing. She found a concealed position on a rooftop and watched the patterns of movement below. She noted which buildings had activity and which seemed empty. She identified possible enemy positions based on how people moved and where they focused their attention. After gathering information, she developed a plan. Using skills from her camouflage training, Elena moved through the urban environment like a ghost. She avoided main streets and used shadows effectively. When she spotted the target in a crowded marketplace, she faced a difficult decision. The shot was possible but risky. A miss would endanger civilians. She waited 45 minutes for the target to move to a less crowded location, then made the shot from an elevated position 200 meters away. Clean hit, no collateral damage, and she extracted without being spotted. Other candidates failed this exercise by rushing their shots or taking unnecessary risks. One candidate succeeded but took 8 hours, showing poor time management. Elena's approach impressed the evaluators because it demonstrated patience, tactical thinking, and precise execution under pressure. These qualities were exactly what the unit sought. As training continued, Elena began to understand why the washout rate was so high. The program did not just test skills, it tested character. Candidates faced ethical dilemmas designed to reveal how they would behave when rules and oversight disappeared. Would they follow orders they believed were wrong? How would they handle situations where the right choice was unclear? These questions had no simple answers, and some candidates broke under the moral weight of the scenarios. Elena struggled with several exercises that challenged her deeply held beliefs about justice and duty. One particularly difficult scenario required her to choose between completing a mission objective and saving an innocent person's life. The scenario was designed so that doing both was nearly impossible. Elena chose to save the person failing the mission. Afterward, she expected to be reprimanded or dismissed. Instead, Lieutenant Colonel Chen invited her to a private discussion. Chen explained that the scenario had no correct answer. The evaluators were not measuring success or failure, but rather how candidates made decisions when facing impossible choices. Elena's choice to prioritize human life over mission success revealed important information about her values. Some missions would require that kind of decision-making. Others would demand the opposite. The unit needed people who could make hard choices and live with the consequences. This conversation changed Elena's understanding of what she was training for. This was not about being a perfect soldier or following orders without question. This was about operating in situations where normal rules did not apply, where decisions carried enormous weight, and where soldiers had to trust their own judgment even when it contradicted official doctrine. It was both liberating and terrifying. By the 4th month, only 6 candidates remained from the original group of 20. Jennifer had washed out in the 3rd month, unable to handle the isolation that came with this type of work. She was reassigned to a conventional sniper unit and would have an excellent career. But she recognized that the specialized unit demanded something she could not provide. There was no shame in that realization. Elena, however, thrived in the program despite its challenges. Her years of self-reliance in the mountains had prepared her for working alone under extreme pressure. She was comfortable with silence, solitude, and the weight of individual responsibility. While other candidates struggled with the lack of clear structure and guidance, Elena found it natural. She had always trusted her own judgment because there had been no one else to rely on. The final evaluation came without warning. Elena was awakened at 3 in the morning and taken by helicopter to an unknown location. She was given a rifle, minimal equipment, and a sealed envelope containing mission orders. The helicopter departed immediately, leaving her alone in darkness. She opened the envelope using her flashlight. The mission was complex. She had to reach a specific location 15 miles away within 36 hours. The route passed through difficult terrain patrolled by opposing forces. Once at the location, she would receive additional instructions. Failure to reach the objective on time or getting captured would result in automatic dismissal from the program. The envelope also contained a compass, a map, and nothing else. Elena studied the map carefully, plotting multiple routes and contingency plans. The direct route was shortest but passed through obvious choke points where opposing forces would likely concentrate. Alternative routes were longer and more physically demanding but offered better concealment. She chose a compromise route that balanced speed and security. The journey tested everything she had learned. She moved mostly at night, hiding during the day in carefully selected positions. She avoided 2 ambushes by spotting signs of human activity before walking into them. When she had to cross open ground, she did so during weather changes when visibility was poor and guards would be distracted. She rationed her water and food carefully, knowing she had no resupply option. After 32 hours of continuous movement with only brief rest periods, Elena reached the objective location. She found another sealed envelope hidden at the coordinates specified in her orders. Inside was a single piece of paper with new instructions. She was to observe a specific building 500 meters away and report on the activities she witnessed. She would be extracted in 12 hours. Elena established a concealed observation position and began her surveillance. For the next 12 hours, she documented everything she saw using a small camera provided in the final envelope. She noted the number of people entering and leaving the building, their equipment, and their behavior. She identified what appeared to be a command post based on communication equipment visible through windows. When the extraction helicopter arrived exactly 12 hours later, she had compiled a comprehensive intelligence report. 3 days after the final evaluation, Elena stood before a review board consisting of Lieutenant Colonel Chen and 2 other officers whose names were never provided. They reviewed her performance across all 6 months of training. The discussion was clinical and detailed, covering both her strengths and weaknesses. Elena answered their questions honestly, not trying to excuse her mistakes but explaining her reasoning in each situation. The board deliberated for 20 minutes while Elena waited outside. When she was called back in, Chen's expression revealed nothing. The silence stretched for several seconds before Chen spoke. Elena had passed the evaluation. She would be assigned the call sign Black Talon and would begin operational training immediately. Only 3 candidates from the original 20 had made it this far. The name carried weight that Elena did not fully understand at first. In military circles, call signs were more than nicknames. They represented identity and belonging. Black Talon suggested both stealth and lethal precision, qualities that summarized Elena's approach to her work. When she wore the small pin bearing a stylized Black Talon symbol, she became part of something larger than herself. Operational training introduced Elena to missions that felt more like intelligence work than traditional military operations. She learned advanced surveillance techniques, communication security, escape and evasion methods, and how to operate in foreign environments without support. Much of the work involved gathering information rather than engaging targets. The shooting skills that had brought her to the military's attention were now just one tool among many. Her first real mission came 4 months after receiving her call sign. Elena was deployed to a region experiencing civil conflict, where various factions competed for control. Her mission was to observe a suspected weapons trafficking route and document who was moving what materials where. She would be inserted alone, operate independently for 3 weeks, and extract with her intelligence data. The deployment was everything the training had prepared her for, and nothing like she expected. The reality of working alone in a genuinely hostile environment carried a psychological weight that simulation could not replicate. Every sound at night made her wonder if she had been discovered. Every local person she encountered might be an enemy or might be an innocent civilian. The line between paranoia and appropriate caution was razor thin. Elena established multiple observation positions overlooking the suspected trafficking route. She moved between them regularly to avoid patterns that enemies might detect. She documented convoy movements, photographed individuals, and recorded radio communications. The work was tedious and stressful, requiring constant vigilance despite long periods where nothing happened. One evening, her position was nearly compromised when a local farmer wandered close to where she was hiding. Elena remained absolutely still, using every technique she had learned about camouflage and concealment. The farmer passed within 10 feet of her position without noticing anything wrong. After he left, Elena's hands shook for 5 minutes from the adrenaline surge. This was not a training exercise. Discovery could mean capture, torture, or death. The intelligence she gathered proved valuable. Her reports helped map an extensive trafficking network that supplied weapons to multiple militant groups. The information led to operations that disrupted the network and potentially saved lives. Elena would never know the full impact of her work, because that information was classified. But she received a commendation that acknowledged her successful mission completion. More deployments followed over the next 2 years. Some were similar reconnaissance missions. Others involved more direct action. Elena conducted missions in mountains, cities, jungles, and deserts. Each environment presented unique challenges that required her to adapt and problem solve. She became skilled at blending into local populations, operating equipment in extreme conditions, and maintaining psychological stability during extended isolation. Her reputation within the military's special operations community grew quietly. Other operators heard stories about the sniper who could disappear into any environment and emerge weeks later with critical intelligence. Some stories were exaggerated, but the core truth remained. Elena was exceptionally good at her job. She had found her purpose and excelled at it. However, the work took its toll. Elena spent most of her time deployed or training for deployment. Relationships were impossible when she could not tell people what she did or where she went. Her mother wrote letters that Elena could only occasionally respond to, always careful not to reveal anything about her real activities. The isolation that had once felt natural now sometimes felt like a prison. During a rare period of leave, Elena visited her home village. Nothing had changed. The same mountains stood eternal. The same handful of families lived in the same houses. But Elena felt disconnected from it all. The girl who had left to join the military no longer existed. In her place was someone who had seen things and done things that could not be explained or shared with people living normal lives. Her mother noticed the change immediately. Over dinner one evening, she asked Elena if she was happy. The question caught Elena off guard. Happy seemed like the wrong word for what she felt. She was fulfilled. She was good at her work. She believed what she did mattered. But happiness felt like something from another life, something she had sacrificed without fully realizing the cost. Elena told her mother that she was fine, that the military was everything she had hoped it would be. Her mother nodded but did not look convinced. Later, as Elena lay in her childhood bed staring at the ceiling, she wondered if her mother understood more than Elena gave her credit for. Perhaps some sacrifices were visible even when their details remained hidden. The leave ended, and Elena returned to duty feeling both relieved and guilty. Civilian life felt foreign now, but she missed the simplicity of it. The military made sense. There were missions, objectives, and measurable outcomes. In the real world, everything felt complicated and uncertain. She was more comfortable in hostile territory than in her own hometown. Her next major mission came with unusual circumstances. Instead of deploying alone or with a small team, Elena was attached to a joint task force conducting a large-scale operation. The mission involved multiple units working together to neutralize a significant threat in a region of strategic importance. Elena's role was to provide precision fire support and intelligence from an overwatch position. The scale of the operation meant working alongside conventional forces who had no idea who Elena was or why a lone sniper had been attached to their operation. She reported directly to the task force commander, a general named Patterson, who had built his reputation through decades of successful operations. Patterson was old-school military, respected by everyone but known for his direct manner and intolerance for anything he perceived as weakness. During the initial planning session, Elena was introduced to the various unit commanders. She was the only woman in the room, and by far the youngest person present. Some officers nodded politely. Others barely acknowledged her presence. When Patterson asked for her assessment of potential sniper positions, she provided her analysis clearly and confidently. Several officers exchanged glances, seemingly surprised that she knew what she was talking about. The operation launched 3 days later. Elena inserted into her overwatch position under cover of darkness, establishing herself on a ridge that overlooked the primary objective area. From this position, she could observe multiple approach routes and provide both intelligence and fire support as needed. The view was spectacular, stretching for miles across rugged terrain bathed in moonlight. As dawn broke, the operation began. Multiple units moved into position, executing a coordinated assault on the target compound. Elena watched through her scope, documenting everything and providing real-time updates on enemy positions and movements. The radio traffic was intense, with various units reporting contact and requesting support. Through it all, Elena remained focused on her sector, watching for threats that others might miss. 2 hours into the operation, Elena spotted movement on a ridgeline 1,200 meters from the main objective. 3 individuals with heavy weapons were setting up a position that would allow them to rain fire down on the advancing friendly forces. They were well concealed and had not been detected by any other units. Elena reported the contact immediately. General Patterson's voice came over the radio, asking if she could engage at that range. 1,200 meters was an extremely difficult shot under any circumstances. Factor in wind, elevation differences, and the need for multiple targets, and the difficulty increased exponentially. Elena assessed the situation quickly. The enemy position would be operational in minutes. If she did not engage, friendly forces would be exposed to devastating fire. She confirmed she could make the shot. Patterson gave her authorization to engage. Elena settled into her rifle, controlling her breathing and calculating all the variables. Wind was steady from the east at approximately 8 miles per hour. Temperature was rising as the sun climbed, which would affect bullet trajectory. The targets were partially concealed behind rocks, presenting small profiles. The general studied Elena for a long moment before speaking. He said that in his 30 years of military service he had worked with countless snipers and special operators. Most were technically proficient, well-trained soldiers who did their jobs competently. But the truly exceptional ones, the ones who performed miracles under pressure, they all had something that could not be taught in any training program. They had an instinct, a connection to their environment and their weapon that went beyond mechanical skill. Elena had that quality. Patterson explained that he was assembling a specialized team for an upcoming high-risk operation. The mission details were classified, but it would require operators who could think independently, adapt to changing circumstances, and perform at the highest level with minimal support. He wanted Elena on the team. Her official chain of command had already approved the temporary assignment. The choice was hers. Elena did not hesitate. She accepted immediately. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had spent years preparing for. Patterson nodded, unsurprised by her answer. He told her to report to a specific facility in 72 hours. Until then, she should rest and prepare mentally for what would be a demanding operation. The briefing would provide more details, but she should understand that this mission carried significant risks that went beyond normal operational dangers. Those 72 hours passed quickly. Elena used the time to maintain her equipment, review her skills, and mentally prepare herself for whatever was coming. She had learned that worry was useless. Either she was ready or she was not, and worrying would not change that reality. She meditated, exercised, and slept well. When the time came to report, she felt calm and focused. The facility where the team assembled was small and isolated, clearly designed for operations that required absolute secrecy. Elena arrived to find 8 other operators already present, all of them experienced special forces personnel from various branches. She was the youngest by at least 5 years and the only woman. Several of the operators looked at her with open skepticism. They knew her call sign and had heard the stories, but stories were just stories until proven in action. General Patterson conducted the briefing personally. The mission involved infiltrating a heavily defended compound in hostile territory to extract a high-value individual who possessed critical intelligence. The target was being held in a location that was technically impossible to assault directly. Stealth was the only viable approach. The team would insert covertly, reach the target, extract him, and disappear before enemy forces could respond. The window of opportunity was narrow, and failure would mean death or capture for the entire team. Patterson explained that Elena's role would be to establish an overwatch position that covered the extraction route. She would provide security and eliminate any threats that appeared during the critical extraction phase. If things went wrong and the team needed emergency support, she would be their last line of defense. It was a position of immense responsibility that required both technical skill and the nerve to make life or death decisions in real time. The mission launched 1 week later. The team flew in by helicopter under cover of darkness, inserting 15 miles from the target compound. They moved through difficult terrain for 2 days, traveling only at night and hiding during daylight hours. Elena carried 70 pounds of equipment, including her rifle, ammunition, communications gear, and survival supplies. Every step was measured and silent. Discovery at this stage would mean immediate mission failure. On the second night, Elena split from the main team to reach her assigned position. She would be alone from this point forward, a mile from the team's infiltration route but positioned to observe and cover the entire extraction corridor. The separation felt familiar. This was how she worked best, alone with her rifle and her training. Elena established her hide site in a rocky outcrop that provided excellent concealment and overlapping fields of fire. She verified her range cards, tested her communication equipment, and settled in to wait. The main team would execute their infiltration the following night. Until then, Elena would observe, document, and remain invisible. The next 24 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Elena remained in position, barely moving, eating cold rations and staying alert despite the monotony. She observed patrol patterns around the compound, noting which routes guards used and when shifts changed. She recorded vehicle movements and documented defensive positions. Every piece of information might prove critical when the extraction began. As darkness fell on the second night, Elena's radio crackled with a brief transmission. The team was moving. She acknowledged and increased her alertness level. Through her night vision equipment, she could see the compound a mile away, lights glowing in the darkness. She could not see the infiltration team, which was exactly how it should be. If she could not see them with her equipment and training, enemy forces had no chance of detecting them. 2 hours passed with no communication. The team was inside the compound, moving toward their objective. Elena controlled her breathing and maintained her focus. Her role now was to watch for any sign that the infiltration had been detected. One alert guard, one unexpected patrol, one piece of bad luck could turn this mission into a disaster. Then her radio crackled again. The team had the target and was moving to the extraction point. Elena scanned her sectors carefully, watching for any response from enemy forces. For several minutes, everything remained quiet. Then she spotted movement near the compound's western gate. Guards were mobilizing, more of them than should be present for a normal patrol change. The alarm had been raised somehow. Elena reported the contact immediately. Patterson's voice came back calm and clear. The team was moving as fast as possible, but they were still 10 minutes from the extraction zone. Enemy forces would reach the extraction route in 5 minutes. Could Elena delay them? This was the moment Elena had trained for. She assessed the situation with cold precision. The enemy force consisted of approximately 15 personnel moving in vehicles toward a point where they would intercept the team. If Elena engaged, she would reveal her position and draw fire, but she would buy the team the time they needed. She confirmed she could engage. Patterson gave authorization. Elena selected her targets carefully, prioritizing the lead vehicles that would reach the extraction route first. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, each one precisely placed. The lead vehicle's tires exploded and the driver went down. The vehicle swerved violently and crashed. The convoy stopped, confused about where the shots had come from. Elena shifted position within her hide site and fired again, hitting another vehicle. Now the enemy knew roughly where she was, and return fire began impacting around her position. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, and Elena heard the distinct sound of heavy weapons being brought to bear. She had successfully become the priority target, which meant the extraction team could move unimpeded. She continued engaging targets methodically, making every shot count. The enemy force was now completely focused on her position, pouring fire into the rocks where she was concealed. Elena felt a bullet pass close enough to hear its distinctive crack. This was the most danger she had ever been in, but her hands remained steady. Years of training had programmed her responses so deeply that fear could not penetrate her concentration. Her radio crackled. The team had reached the extraction point. The helicopter was inbound. Elena maintained her fire, keeping the enemy suppressed and disorganized. She heard the helicopter arrive, hover briefly, and depart. The team was away. Her mission was complete. Now she had to extract herself from a position that was being systematically destroyed by enemy fire. Elena waited for a lull in the shooting, then moved. She abandoned her primary position and began working her way through the rocks using an escape route she had identified earlier. The enemy continued firing at her old position, not yet realizing she had moved. This gave her precious seconds to put distance between herself and the immediate danger. She moved through the darkness using every evasion technique she knew, changing direction frequently and using terrain to break line of sight. Behind her, she could hear enemy forces organizing a pursuit. But they were looking for her in the wrong place, and with each minute that passed, her lead increased. She reached a pre-positioned cache where she had hidden additional supplies and changed her appearance, discarding her tactical gear for civilian clothes that would let her blend into local populations. The extraction took 3 days of careful movement, avoiding patrols and checkpoints while making her way to a secure location where she could signal for pickup. When she finally reached friendly forces, she was exhausted but uninjured. The mission had succeeded, and the intelligence extracted would save countless lives. Her part in that success would remain classified, known only to the few people with the appropriate clearances. General Patterson met her personally when she returned to the secure facility. He shook her hand, a rare gesture that spoke volumes about his respect. He told her that her actions under fire had been extraordinary. Every member of the extraction team had made it out safely because Elena had drawn enemy fire and held them off long enough for the helicopter to arrive. The